You can't get used to it. The humidity, the smell of mud and leprosy and fire, the anguish in his eyes. They found bullets in the mirror. He was shooting at himself. Calcutta, 1930-ish. Here is Anne-Marie, the lovely, languid and red-haired wife of the French ambassador to India. She is bored, stifled by the very idea of getting used to this country. So she spends her days in the embrace of other men, attachés, English businessmen, chinless lovers. The ambassador does not care. He is much older than her. It probably doesn't work, you know. But one man does care. Doe-eyed, tear-streaked and hopelessly fallen in love. The disgraced but not quite cancelled French vice-consul stalks and whines and whimpers and looks for Anne-Marie through so many drawing rooms and across so many empty tennis courts, touching the handle of a bicycle she had once ridden, appearing in a room as she drifts away, ghosted by her rebuffs. Hey, you up? This, of course, is India's Song by Marguerite Duras, a hothouse flower wilting in its exquisite vase, slow, poetic, theatrical, crumbling into dust as the skin of the leper crumbles into dust. That is a quote, I am not that mean. Well-educated and bored diplomats come to India and slowly they rot silently in India, unmoored, uncomfortable, repulsed by themselves, by their illiterate needs. Heartbreak, desire, the bubbling sweat of lust, the hold that a woman has over a man is very French. Channeling Duras's long, tumbling career of novels, screenplays, films in which she, the poet laureate of Malays, explored the intricacies of feminine desire, of booze, of men who try to learn the language of love, and the women who educate and sometimes ensnare them. Again, very French. Inheriting the mantle of René and Rob Grier, this film, perhaps the last great pulse of the new wave, is a sticky and alluring sweet. And this is MoobTube, disgraced but not forgotten. Ralph, could you get used to it?
Yeah, so the first thing I want to say about Marguerite Duras is I made some notes because I thought I find this work quite difficult to because it's so non-linear. It's harder to know. Like with Apocalypse Now, we sort of find ourselves going through the film more or less in order of like things that happen and then going on offshoots.
Yeah, Apocalypse Now, there is a path, you know, there is a hero's journey or anti-hero's journey, you know.
Whereas this is just like being in a room this is like being in a sauna or something. And you kind of lose track of like if you go to a sauna for like a few hours, you won't be able to remember like when did you go to the steam room, when did you go to the banyo, when did you use the plunge pool, like it all just kind of
soaps together.
One of the rules they say with film is that you should show, don't tell, to the extent that if there's no audio, just the visuals of the film should be able to tell you the story. And this is absolutely not the case for anything that Duras does. All the context is given through the voiceover. Yeah,
and you couldn't even lip read this film.
No, they're not even saying any of the dialogue.
No, the dialogue all happens off screen. A lot of action happens off screen. Events happen off screen.
I find myself completely distracted watching this film. Frustrated, bored,
distracted.
Sleepy.
In the film or distracted beyond it? Like
beyond it.
Yeah.
You know, I was talking to my friend, I was talking to Daniel, friend of the pod, about attention deficit disorder. A few of my friends have been diagnosed with it recently, and I've been sort of questioning my own relationship to attention and concentration. And
sorry, what?
And I was like sort of speculating about whether I have some kind of difficulty with attention, and Daniel was just like, no, you're just watching Marguerite Duras films.
which probably conveys a certain other kind of illness or.
But I like slow films. I like Bellatar. I like going
Tarkovsky, famously difficult films that your attention slides into and out of like a pool.
Yeah, but with Tarkovsky, there is some kind of like. There are drum hits. There are like crescendos. There are like booms. This film,
and there's conflict as well. And one film this film doesn't have is the conflict happens elsewhere, which is partly testament to the fact that it was originally a stage play, written for theatre and converted to, which made a lot of sense for me when I read that. And I was like, okay, like halfway, like I was distracted as well because I was reading about it while I was watching it, and was like, okay, that makes a lot of sense because the staging, the choreography, the organisation of bodies and space. Is that of a play.
Yeah, and in a way, whenever directors attempt to cross these boundaries, I'm always excited. I don't want to, like, we're not going to spend half an hour, 40 minutes talking about how bored we were, but like, it doesn't really work to have that much literary content. It doesn't hold your attention. It makes the narrative is just really like hard to follow. But yeah, I mean, you're more of a writer than I am. You've got a very poetic mind. I've great. Every time you do the intro, I'm reminded of my admiration for your way with words. How does are you? I think certain aspects of your work would make me think you'd be drawn to Duras.
There's a lot here that I like conceptually. The kind of languid, nostalgia tinged aura of the film, right? Like this sense of this decayed, forgotten memory of a past happening in a crumbling building is absolutely my jam. And it really fucking is. It's it's very Proustian in a way, but this very dark Proust, like dark timeline Proust, evil Proust. The decay, the rot, the sumptuousness of it. Like, don't get us wrong, like not much happens, but visually a lot is happening. It's like I was attracted to the literariness of its aesthetic, maybe because it's something that looks like it would be very good to describe, and to see the stuff, it's all very. It's got this like 70s music video energy to it, or 70s album cover, because it's got these like twinkling kind of fake light off these faceted champagne glasses, like deep stained mirrors, rich velvety curtains, billowing leaves. Like it's all very rich, piles of like velvet. It's extremely rich. So it looks like it would lend itself well to being described, right? And it really reminded me of like Alain Robbe-Grillet, his novel Jealousy, which is really that's like 1957, which is strikingly similar in some ways because it's about a husband who observes his wife's affairs in a house, and he's kind of this peeping Tom. It happens in this kind of like Bayeux, like sticky mansion in France, and he's often like the interior layout. Shout out to Matthew Turner, who wrote a really good essay about this, and I might include it in the episode description. But the kind of
about this film, or no?
About Robbe-Grillet's novel about jealousy, because it's about the kind of manifestation of disordered space, because inside this, he's constantly trying to chase his wife's indiscretions and never captures them fully. Like it's always happening in the corner of his eye, like in a room that he can't access. It's all, and we get the same kind of vibe from this film, because in this huge this consul's palace, the ambassador's palace in India, this camera's very static for the most part. Characters wander into shot, gaze at each other, dance, lean their heads together, and then like walk off. And then we hear this constant burbling of this voiceover, which you talked about, and that is very literary as well. And it's very fucking hard to follow though, because it's like I will admit that I completely fudged the understanding of this film, because I was like, I thought that the narrative was that the sad, droopy character with the goatee was the ambassador, and the ambassador was crying because he was upset his wife was having loads of affairs. I didn't realise that you don't actually see the ambassador in the whole film. Yeah. He's always away in Nepal.
I had to do a bit of wiki dancing to discover this.
Bit of wiki. And it's like, because this guy is the vice consul. He's one of her suitors, and he's rebuffed. That's why he's sad.
All the other guys, they get their wick in, but
they get their wick in. He doesn't. because he loves to intensely. But yeah, so from a literary perspective, this looks like a great book, and as a film, it's gloriously decadent and wonderful to watch. But hard to like get your claws into, I think, and because let's talk about that, because the voiceover is our main gateway into this film. So how did you feel about the voiceover? What did you get from it?
Parts of it are very beautifully written. I guess the main reference points generally tend towards literature. I'm not very well read, but I guess Clarice Lispector, Jean Rhys, like a lot of those
100% Lispector,
like Jane Bowles, a lot of those authors who kind of write from this very desperate female desiring perspective, which I think we've talked about this a lot, like how I think now in society, like men are like for whatever societal political reason, like men are now beginning to identify a lot more with these like needy women because like everyone is becoming more lonely and needy, and I guess
and they're finding a collective language for that want.
Yeah, whereas but then you also see that in like Last Year at Marienbad, which I feel I don't really know much about Alain Robbe-Grillet except for the fact that like Alain Robbe-Grillet wrote the screenplay for Last Year at Marienbad by Alain
René, yeah.
And Marguerite Duras wrote the screenplay for Hiroshima Mon Amour, also by Alain René. And they both were mostly writers who also did like films. Like Robbe-Grillet did loads of films that were sort of erotic and
this is like the literary end of the French New Wave, where Jean-Luc Godard was very much the grand priest and very much a visual inventor. This is like the literary end. This is like the New Wave book club with these three writer directors, and they're all highly literary. Hiroshima Mon Amour, she wrote the screenplay for, like you said, has these voiceovers and these fragmented disjunctive scenes. It's all very breathless and desperate. But
it's very good. Hiroshima Mon Amour is like a good film. Like India Song is not a good film.
No, it's not a good film. It's an interesting film. We said it. We kind of put a card on the table here. Yeah, it's not a great. This should be a perfect failure, to be honest. But it.
No, but her whole career is a perfect failure.
She was. She did have an interesting life, but the
Venn between the Marguerite Duras season and the Perfect Failure season is
overlaps so interestingly.
No, because all her films are like this. I watched the clips. And literally, I even watched a bit of the sequel to India Song, which is like, which is just like, it's even less of a film than India Song. It's complete. There are no actors in it. It's just completely shots of chateaus and so voiceovers.
Boring. Heinz Emmigholz.
Very beautiful. Like the cinematography is utterly beautiful, and all of the interiors are just like stunning and dreamy.
Yeah, very dreamy, very oniric. It's a very dreamlike, because when I was watching it, I was like, it feels like, so the voiceover creates a kind of ecosystem in which it feels like we're listening to whispered gossip at the edge of a party, a conversation between two friends who are meeting over coffee. They're talking about what is happening on stage. I say stage, I mean literally sound stage on the film, right? Because there's little whispers and bits of gossip about the vice consul. It's all very disjunctive. There's long digressions on what it is to like be in India. One's like, about careerism as well. So people are just talking about their condition. They're often they're not talking about the big things. They very allude to like, the anguish in his eyes, the malaise, like, she was only attracted to men who could not get used to this. There's a lot of like existential, diffuse existential questioning without any solidity to it. So on the one hand, you've got these fragments of like gossip and illusion and memory, and then visually it feels like we're watching a memory, because we hear the sound of a party, we hear the sound of piano, we hear the sound of things happening, but we see 2, 1, 3 people on screen at a time looking off stage to where the action supposedly is happening. And it, like a memory, you forget the things that you weren't focusing on, you remember the things you were focusing on. It's almost like they're standing out in the memory. This dancing couple, Anne-Marie and one of her lovers, that's what you remember in the memory. You don't remember other people, the other faces, it kind of blurs. So it's somewhere between a dream and a memory, a recollection. And then when we see a lot of the shots, exterior shots of the palace, which is actually in France, not India. It's decayed and dilapidated. The windows are broken. It's uncared for. There's grass breaking through the tarmac. So it feels like a lapsed thing. Like it's like taxidermy rather than, the kind of uncanny valley you get when you look at a taxidermied animal rather than looking at even a dead animal or a living animal. That's what it feels like. It's that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a sort of
Freudian unheimlich. It's odd, right?
Dare I say it, a hauntology.
Ooh, you went there.
I went Fisherian.
You went fishing.
No, but it's like burial, but like for French aristocrats. Like the whole thing is just.
But yeah, truly it is.
Put that in the caption.
Put that in the caption. You've actually hit the nail on the head there, because it is, this hauntology of these decayed, lapsed places and the memories which are passing through them.
I admire the front because no one by rights, especially in this identity politics focused age, should give a flying fuck about these people. They're rich, they're white, they're colonialists. Like there's an Indian voice right at the start, like a sort of singing Indian voice that's just there to sort of tell you're in India, and then the rest of the film is just white people having feelings. I mean, I'm cool. I'm absolutely in support of white people having feelings. I have some of my own, but like. The film is kind of like not even worried about that in the slightest as a vibe.
No, it doesn't problematize the context. It doesn't problematize the source of these people's anxiety and memories, which is that they've been uprooted from, their aristocratic lives in France, which are probably quite similar, quite dull, and they've gone to find something. It's a gapyar, they've gone to find something in India. And they're bored and dissuaded and abject and sad in this other country. India is kept at a distance, interestingly, and it's something that Duras did intentionally. She said she'd been to India once when she was younger, and she was like, I didn't choose to shoot in India.
She was born in French colonial Vietnam.
Indochina,
right?
Indochina. But
shout out to Apocalypse Now.
Shout out
to the French bit of Apocalypse Now, which is basically a Duras film.
It is a Duras film. The long Duras. Because, we shouldn't give a fuck about these people. Their malaise is the malaise of the conqueror who, sitting on their heap of spoils, is like, oh, this is a bit shit, actually.
Yeah, it's like Drake.
There's no spiritual richness here. It's just this personal sadness, which pervades everything. And and I don't think Duras problematizes what that might be, which might be a rot at the heart of the idea of colonialism. That these are the victors. These are the people that won. And they're spiritually maladroit. They're kind of dead inside. All they can do. What they're doing is very glorified and poetic. But what they're really doing is just sucking and fucking, and getting sad about it.
Yeah, but then there's no. It's interesting. You. I hope you don't mind me sharing this with the MoveTube audience. But you saw the shot early on where Delphine Seyrigg's breast is exposed she's sort of lying on this large carpet. And these men kind of like huddle next to her and touch her. And you were you messaged me with some level of arousal and excitement that this might be a kind of erotic film. And then you were sorely disappointed. I actually noticed on
cancelled.
There was another film in the movie series which also has like an exposed female breast like very early on, and then like no sex at all for the rest. I skimmed through it. I was like, this is like another Marguerite Duras thing. Like all her films are the same. She very much fell into a style which is kind of admirable. But like there's this kind of like the erotic is not really. It's like not really that erotic. It's like.
It's not really about the physicality of sex or desire. It's about the mental projection of desire. Because
the power games.
Yeah, power games. Because we see that the ambassador does not give a fuck who his wife fucks. She kind of seems to only be attracted to men who these young men who are probably virgins or whatever. She might be their first amorous encounter kind of thing, and they kind of fall in love with her, and she kind of has sex with them, whatever, and kind of moves on. There's a very interesting discourse on female and feminine sexuality and what it gives to these men who are actually quite spiritually empty. And love is something that Duras was obviously very interested in. Her own her own kind of autobiography or autobiographical novel, The Lover, L'Amant, is really similar. It's about a young girl in Indochina who sleeps with an older man, and she kind of, he tries to come to terms with his love for her. And there's a lot about men trying to come to terms with their love, and the women being able to move aside. The women come across as the bachelors here, don't they?
Yeah,
almost. She does, at least, because she's the only woman seen in the film. The only other woman is really alluded to, who is there's female voices in the voiceovers, but there's a mad beggar woman, as they describe her, who comes onto the property and kind of screams and shouts, and they talk about how kind of, oh, actually she is free, she is this ridiculous kind of quite odious aristocratic kind of peering at her and going, oh, maybe she's happier than we are.
It's the same with the Indian singing at the start, I think, kind of like there's a contrast being drawn there. And in a way, those even though they're so condescending, those contrasts are what makes the film bearable, because it's not a polyform film. It's a film that like diverges in form from mainstream cinema quite dramatically, but it doesn't have a mixture of forms. It is very uniform in its stylistic approach.
It's very uniform. It actually creates an intellectual distance, I think, because it's so slow and because it's so self-consciously literary, and the pace is so glacial, and there's such a disjunction between what we're seeing and what we're being told is happening, that we create an intellectual distance when we're kind of invited to walk into that. So I don't blame the film for. I don't think we're saying, well, these people are just like, reprehensible aristocrats in colonial India, and we shouldn't give a fuck about them. Like, that's partly true, but also it's still interesting to kind of swim in their life world a bit.
We should give a fuck about them precisely because they are the oppressor. Like, you have to understand the mind of the
and we realise it's quite empty and quite petty, but capable of poeticizing its own tragedy. And that's partly like a very French thing, I think. I think it's also a very kind of a core element, like the tragedy that enfolds and wraps up the new wave as a movement, which is like where the death drive is like buried in the heart and the genitals. Love and death are conflated, madness and desire are conflated. It's like this ultimate expression of like Barthes, like Lover's Discourse, right? The kind of self-referential mirror of obsession. And in this film, we're kind of invited to kind of swim into it. And
Duras, in her book Practicalities, pars off that book by Barthes.
Does she? Interesting. Yeah. Actually,
do you want to hear?
Give me a reading.
I'll find it. Say some more stuff or not? Oh, I found it. A writer who hasn't known women, has never touched a woman's body, and perhaps never read any books or poems written by women, and yet thinks he's been involved in literature is mistaken. You can't be ignorant of such essential data and still be an intellectual leader, even just for your peers. Although I felt quite friendly towards Roland Barthes, I could never admire him. He always struck me as very careful and professorial and strictly partisan. After the Mythologies series, I couldn't read him anymore. I tried after he died to read his book on photography, but again, I couldn't get on with it, except for a very fine chapter about his mother. The much revered mother who had been his companion and the only heroine in the wilderness of his mind. Then I tried to read A Lover's Discourse, fragments, but I couldn't. Obviously it's very clever, jottings on love, yes, on love, but in making them, he managed, in fact, not to love at all, as far as I can see. A charming man, really charming, of course, and a writer, of course, that's the point. A writer of writing that's stiff and regular.
Stiff and regular. Like, I think,
well,
she's saying that he's like vanilla. She's reverse cowgirl and he's missionary. Or I mean, this is it's interesting because when she talks about she's talking about love as this indefinite thing, but actually I suppose Roland Barthes is talking about this equity of love, or trying to, where obsessive love is self-destructive and only interested in the image of the lover rather than the subject of the lover. But she was very much more powerful than that, because that was a very male thing, I suppose. And she's coming from a feminine perspective. There's an interesting quote in The Lover where she says, there's a couple of things. She says, it's afterwards you realise that the feeling of happiness you had with a man didn't necessarily prove that you loved him. And again, she says, in love there are no vacations, no such thing. Love has to be lived fully with its boredom and all of that. And I think there's this element of love is it's possible for something like love and romance and loving and desiring to be simultaneously mythical and banal, and to have a center which is like, I guess, maybe sex or the heart, and to have no center. So in this film, we're kind of constantly, that's why there's so many mirror images, voids, things happening off stage.
I love the mirrors.
The mirrors are fantastic. There's this like existential malaise and this great certainty, you know, and so it's ambiguous. I was trying to think, you know, what is she saying here? I think I don't think it's like arts for art's sake. I think she's just saying that in order to comprehend the self and our loving, then it's necessary to kind of explore its certainties and its mysteries, and the subjectivity or whatever is like in the midst of that somewhere. It's in this big dark pool. Swimming around in that pool is itself kind of interesting and fun, and that's what makes a life, maybe. I think she was just very interested in boredom and malaise and, like, you know, this languorous aristocratic rot.
So I want to say something about boredom.
Yeah, go on.
I don't think we are like able to be bored now in the way that we used to be.
Go on.
And in this way, Duras' work feels kind of anachronistic and strange.
It is a different age.
Like, I can't think of anything, like, almost like watching these sort of people be in a house and kind of do nothing. It's like, oh, I'd quite like to go on a holiday, you know, and I lock my phone up in a suitcase or something, you know, because it's we're so exposed to stimuli now, and even in especially in the field of love and desire, we have so many outlets in which to kind of
pornography, dating apps,
exactly
social media as a whole as a tool of desiring.
So in a way, this work feels really dated because it doesn't acknowledge any of that. I mean, how could it? But like, no. It doesn't have.
How dare this film not address social media?
No, but there's things like Kathy Acker's work. You know, it predates technology mostly, but it like internet technology, but it kind of covers that the kind of emotions that technology brings up in a much more present way. Whereas like Duras' work does feel like it's, but in a way, I long to long in this very long way. Because the way I long at the moment is like, oh, she read my message. Oh, okay, cool. Should I send something more or whatever? There's this. Oh, I'm dating this person next week. Okay, cool. Do I fancy her? Maybe not. Like, you know, there's all of that activity. Whereas there's like not a great deal.
But that's
of activity.
very similar. The activity that is happening, but it's happening at a more lyrical stage. I think because what we're looking at, we're not looking at the like day to day of that boredom happening. We're looking at a memory of boredom. And a memory of those thoughts seen from a remove. Like, I think the voiceovers imply that she's already dead at the end of this film.
Weird, because there's a sequel.
Yeah. Is there? Whatever. She's dead. She's dead and buried, you know?
Oh, right. I didn't even really get that. Like, I feel like a bad film podcaster because I don't even fucking know what happened in this film. Like...
It was very hard. Like, no judge. Like, it was very hard to follow. I think they allude to the fact that she died and is buried in the English cemetery, and then the ambassador went back to France straight afterwards.
What if we did Speed or something and watched this film?
Anything. Let's just do some MDMA and watch this film. It might. Do you know what? I
just don't feel like I absorbed very much of it.
No,
it's the second time I've seen it as well. I watched it with a friend like 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And I wanted to. Part of the reason I wanted to review it, like this time, is because I didn't feel I absorbed much of it the first time.
I think that's the idea, though, because how much can you absorb somebody else's existential malaise? Like, it's impenetrable. It's like swimming in syrup, isn't it? Like,
but you can
too rich, impossible to move through. And I think that's the point, because we're like the little twittering voices at the edge of this thing as well. You know, no one really grasps what's going on. That's why, you know, everybody's malaise sounds the same, even though it's perfect. Like, you know, when she's it's implied that she's talking to one of these suitors, and he's like, I am repulsed by this, you wouldn't understand. And it's like, but actually his repulsion and his spiritual objection is actually really generic, and everyone's spiritual, you know, it's equally comprehensible and impossible to understand. But to go back to what you were saying before about our capacity to be bored now, it's true in part. Like, we have ultimate we have I agree with the spirit of what you're saying, but not with the letter. Like there is so many sources through which we can get stimulated, through which we can be distracted. But I wouldn't say we're not bored. I think we are bored.
Yeah.
I think we're just bored with more stimuli. I think the stimuli have pushed us into
That's what I mean.
A more diffuse. Yeah, it's like a different state of boredom.
Clarifying me.
It's all right. That's what I'm here for. But the idea of, being in a house with no internet and your days are just endless and you're not really attached to the world beyond the gates of the house is an interesting one, because it's not something we really experience. In the age of social media or whatever, like the news cycle kicks up each day and we're kind of, whether we choose to or not, we're plunged into a world around us, and it's there, and it's kind of
these guys
compelling.
Don't have any world around them.
No, they don't really care to understand like India. They don't care because they're just so dismissive of it. They're not
bothered about the Supreme Court appointment process.
Yeah.
They're like, what's
they
that
don't care about polling in Massachusetts or
COVID. I never met her.
But that's it. Like there's like bits where people talk about like some political stuff. There's like an allusion to like a bombing and something, but I think it's more to illustrate. They're just gossiping about the disgrace because the vice consul was disgraced for some reason. I think it's because he shot a leper. Is that it?
Don't ask me, mate.
You're asking and you're barking up the wrong tree.
This podcast is going to be listened to by someone who actually really loves Marguerite
this film.
Duras,
they're like, what are you talking about?
They're just going to hate us. They're not going to listen to any of the other episodes.
I'm sorry.
But he's done good. Like the thing is, like Hiroshima, like when Alain Resnais is involved, there was that, like Marion Bad and Hiroshima Mon Amour have, like, they solve this problem. Like the existential grief is like very cinematically. Is conveyed cinematically very well.
Because it's conveyed through a conventional romance, a more conventional romance. An unconventional romance in some senses, because it's between a Japanese man and a French woman after World War II. But it's conventional in the sense of there's drama, there's high points, there's low points, there's moments of conflict. And this film doesn't have that, right? We're just looking at like mannequins.
That's true.
Spinning around these rooms,
But there are conflicting interests. There are like people who have like desires that are not fulfilled, that are obstacles. But it's very like,
it's hard to care. It's hard to really care about them because we're not hearing it in their own words. Like we're not kind of allowed into their inner worlds. There's like the bit that does get a bit more exciting is when the vice consul is rebuffed by her and he's like, "Fuck it." Even though it's improper, what if I shout, "I love you"? And he goes onto the balcony, he disappears, and we just hear him screaming.
That's actually...
I must go home with her. I must go home with her.
That contrast is very productive, actually.
That explosion of emotion is really interesting. And people's revulsion of it.
I want to say something about music,
Go on.
which I guess ties back into all the hauntology chat. The listeners who are alienated by this, hauntology is a concept that... I think it came off Derrida actually, but Mark Fisher sort of popularised it, and it sort of basically means when people make art that gathers sort of the echoes and embers of like past sounds. So there's like a, Burial does a lot of sampling with kind of like gun sounds on video games and
very fragmented and delayed.
Yeah, and like the Caretaker does these things with the, hotel music and anyway, lots of echo and reverb. A bit of educational section of the show. I feel like that's a very art world in joke concept.
Yeah, it's one of the things people actually, maybe I think it's something I use but don't necessarily deeply understand. But anyway.
I probably don't deeply understand it either, but I think it's good to have a go. Music though, I want to talk about music. Like the music is very haunty. The haunts one. I also thought of like and actually there's the film Vera Baxter, which is another Duras film on Mubi, has this jazzy bossa nova refrain. I realise on this podcast I call things bossa nova when I don't know what they are.
No, it sounds good though. Sounds roll.
Yeah. But it's like it's this refrain and it just goes on and on throughout the whole film, like for an hour and a half.
Loops.
It's maddening. And it's similar in this film with the piano music, but it's a bit more variable here.
Literally India song, which is I think it's the ambassador or the vice consul. He says that's what brought him to India was this song. This alluring, mysterious thing of another world, which probably quite didn't live up to his realities of it, because it's like this jazz piece, this jazzy piano piece. And it's funny because the piano section of it is playing when they're in dancing, and the piano is there unplayed. So there's this kind of weird disjunction between the music we're hearing and the music, where is the source of the music? And music in this is used to kind of like, it's kind of funny, the use of music in this film in a way, because it contrasts so heavily with what's going on. These kind of blank, dark rooms with incense sticks burning in them, and then there's this like jazzy little number playing in the background, and there's a party happening somewhere, but it's not. I would like to say that the thing it did remind me of again was a book, not a film, which is Watermark by Joseph Brodsky, Russian emigre poet. And when he was in America, because he was exiled from Russia, he used to visit Venice, and he visited Venice like 20 times or something. He'd visit every winter. And a lot of it's about him remembering these winter sojourns in Venice, and it's all dark and dreary, and it's very unreal and surreal, because he just wanders through these palaces, and history kind of rises up and falls down. And it's the memory of a place he's in love with. It's the image of the romance of the place, and it's very hard to get a grip on. That's what the music did for me here, because it was like, it's like this thing happening in another room, and you've arrived a bit too late, or you're, seeing it out the corner of your eye. And I think the music was really successful, because weirdly it was like the most filmy bit of the film. That's what it felt like.
Another thing I want to say about music and about distraction ties it into, and also thinking about this film in relationship to other art forms. An hour before we went to record this, I basically just had a free hour, and I decided to try and sort of immerse myself in Duras to just be more articulate. I mean, I've been doing it for the last few days, periodically, just sort of looking at bits of her work, and reading her book Practicalities. But I ended up getting distracted during this hour by revisiting and watching a review of The Microphones in 2020 by Phil Elverum, which is a 45-minute very repetitive, like lo-fi indie song all about
beautiful
his life and how he kind of started making music, and then kind of referring also to the grief that he suffered from his wife Genevieve dying, which is explored in more detail in the fantastic A Crow Looked at Me.
It's an exceptionally
very good album.
I haven't seen the film, but it's an exceptionally interesting song. But go on.
I just sort of found that to be relevant, like the very indulgent verbal, like longing, like long
the digressions and the repetitions,
details and repetitions. Yeah, that felt like a modern form of that, and it requires quite a lot of attention to sort of pick it up properly.
Yeah. Well, actually, you're right, because the interesting thing about that, again, and the interesting thing about all confessional art, is that we're asked to care about somebody else's remembering and misremembering of their own past, and why it's important to them, and the kind of function of art there is to make us care a bit. And this film kind of tries to do that, I think. There's a weird, like, you really want to understand what's going on in their heads, and you really want to understand what it is that motivates people and what pulls them apart. Like, when you see the vice consul with these tears rolling down his cheek, there's this immense gulf of like sadness and horror there, and you really want to understand it, and that understanding isn't really returned, even though you're given all the space and all the facts, shuffled badly, but you're given all the facts to kind of get it, but you don't completely get it. And that's what's interesting to me. You're invited into, like, can you empathize with this? Is it more than just, lovesickness? And actually, lovesickness itself might just be something difficult to empathize with, but really important to empathize with. I don't know.
Another thing I want to say about this is, like, it really makes me want to go out and make films.
Yeah.
Like, it makes filmmaking seem easy, which is like, for me as a filmmaker, I'm quite bad at, like, accepting the challenging nature of things. The way I end up making things is usually because I get really manic and I convince myself that it'll be really easy, and then I get stuck in and I get really excited, and then it's hard, obviously, because it's always hard to make good work. But this film makes filmmaking seem easy. And
do you think it is? Is this an easy film to make?
To be honest, I think Marguerite Duras, I don't think it doesn't seem like she had an easy life. But it seems like she developed a style that can be witnessed across different forms that she worked in. She developed a style and a voice that's very distinctive, and she had no inhibitions about repeating herself or indulging herself, and that meant that she was able to produce a huge body of work that's very consistent. And if you're into that, that's great. And like, I'm really into Fassbinder, and Fassbinder had a similar tendency. Like, and no, like, yeah, like I'm really envious of that ability to let it fall out like that,
I think it's interesting when people do adhere to the same repetitive concerns. It's interesting because they are telling you something about themselves, or they're trying to work out the indeterminacy of their own life. Like Fassbinder was obviously like plagued by demons, big and small, and I think Duras was an alcoholic, and had a lot of pain in her life. And I think a lot of these films, she found like a language where she could revisit it and revisit it and revisit it. And for her, maybe it wasn't important that it was necessarily successful. It was important that it was said. Why else would you write 14 novels?
Addiction, maybe. I mean, she was an alcoholic. I don't want to pathologize her, but like the films, like the films are quite chronic. Like each one is like, it's like very very similar in its fixation with interiors, just the shot styles, the way that music's used, the kind of things people say. It would be very, very easy to do a parody of, and I mean that in a very good way, but it would be very easy to do a parody of this style of filmmaking.
Oh, for sure. It's ripe for
you did in your intro, basically.
Plucking. I did, I went straight to that. I wasn't even planning on doing a ridiculous French accent, but it kind of came out because it typifies that kind of mid-century malaise of European ascendance, I suppose, with people who are very smart and very emotional, who were kind of in a world which didn't have really a language for that, I suppose. We're much more, I think, capable of expressing and exploring our emotions now in a kind of immediate way. Who
is this we, Owen?
The we of us, me and you. I think we at least have the tools for it and the language for it. There's kind of a format for us to explore our feelings with our peers more. Go on. Because I feel like the awareness of what people are going through, I think this was a very public, very private despair that like Duras was communicating.
But I don't think this is like, I don't think the problems that the people in this film suffer could be solved by like an CBT. Enhanced discourse of men's mental health, or like Prince Harry or something. Did you see the new Keir Starmer like party political broadcast where like? No,
I've muted all Keir Starmer.
No, I know, but there's a funny clip. There's a funny bit of the Keir Starmer political broadcast where he's like people like it's a montage of people expressing their various political concerns, and like the second person to speak says like, I've got like. It's a bloke, and he's like, I've got difficulty talking about my feelings, and I know a lot of my mates, struggling a lot with their mental health, and that's it. Like that's like, well, like one of the like that's just the thing is like this
what
meme
does Keir
of like
Starmer say?
He doesn't say anything. He's just front loading the thing of like it's like patriotism, men's mental health. Like there's going to be like a sort of like Hitler Youth sort of CBT therapy thing.
I mean, okay, maybe you're right. I am stretching, but I still think I'm right in what I'm saying, in that the tools we use to process our feelings can often be more immediate in a modern world.
But I think these people are more immediate.
They're more immediate in an emotional confession.
Like they can just feel, they could just shout their stuff. Like, do you know anyone who could like go out and just like shout what they feel? Like the vice consul guy does. That's
true.
I think the discourse that we have about mental health is like because there's also it's allied with this discourse about toxicity and being being like safe and stuff. Actually means that very often we're not being as raw and honest as we could be.
Yeah,
that's my fucking take.
That's your take. I mean, it's true. There's the MH, like shorten it, which itself is quite insipid. You're right. There is a very facile, what Fisher called like the privatization of mental health. It is about you saying you have it and then fixing it yourself.
Yeah, self-improvement.
Without regard to class oppression or things like money and cash and materiality, which affects your mental health in a big way. So yeah, maybe this is what I mean. What I love about this film is its confessional absurdity and the poetic way it treats malaise as a thing, because we don't really have that. We have like objection as a modern thing, but it's just we kind of just talk about it as like, oh, I'm back on this hell site, I feel sad. Yeah, I feel like the social media tendency with mental health is like this constant attempt to articulate the feeling with words in a sort of linear way. I suppose we use memes as metaphors in quite an exciting way at the moment, as in like the people in our retinue. But like, but I also think like the poetry of the way feelings are expressed here is pretty beautiful. Yeah, it's very beautiful, and I'm jealous. I'm jealous that this language is kind of a bit antiquated now. Like you said, it's kind of, you can make a parody of it, but you couldn't make this film. You couldn't make this film again and be taken seriously, whereas in 1975 you could absolutely make this film. You could absolutely make a romance like Hiroshima Mon Amour before that, and it struck a chord with people, and it continues to strike a chord because people still like Marguerite Duras. I mean, she's on Mubi, right? That must mean people like her. Maybe they don't. I'd really like to see the stats with Mubi, like how, when it asks you at the end to rate the film with, probably actually the duration stats, how long people stay with it would be really interesting. That would be interesting. Yeah, do people drop off? Do people kind of make it through to the second hour? Because I kind of treated it like the first hour. I kind of felt a sense of achievement getting to the first hour, and I was like, yeah, same. 54 minutes left. Where's my medal? I don't know if I can do this. Where's my medal? Where's my participation trophy? Where is it? That's what I got when I dropped out of uni. They gave me a certificate of higher education. I dropped out of uni in the first year, and they said I have dropped out after a term, but they basically said if you write a short dissertation we'll give you and submit a film, then we can give you and pay your fees till the end of the year. We give you a certificate that say that you did a year of higher education. Given how worthless BAs are, can you imagine how worthless that is? Should have just got a refund. It's rare though. It's who has one of those? Frame it. I don't even know where it is. Fuck school. Fuck school. Yeah, that's what we encourage you to do. Don't drop out. Start a podcast in your warehouse. I'm kind of parodying Hannibal Buress here, but eat hummus. I think we've come to our natural conclusion, haven't we, Owen? in life and in podcast terms, yeah. All right. So yeah, interesting. I was really glad we talked about this film. We don't know what we might review Tinto Brot Salon Kitty next week. That's on the card. Yeah, let's do it. It's hard. I think it's interesting. As ever, let us know what you'd like us to review. It's on Mubi. Obviously, Mubi UK only at the moment. We don't have a VPN, and we don't assume our listeners do either. No, so it's kind of skewed. But yeah, let us know what you want us to review, like this week or the week after. Keeping recommendations coming in. Tell us what you think of the pod as well. We love getting feedback. You might, as a listener, you might feel a bit embarrassed about giving feedback and see us as kind of aloof or strange. But actually, we love it. We're all humans in this thing together. It really makes a difference that we're not screaming into the void. Happy. We're not. It makes us happy. We feel like sometimes we're the French vice consul shouting on the balcony. And that vice consul, 40 years later, had a podcast. It's Melvin Bragg, actually. Oh, I love Melvin Bragg. I love Melvin Bragg. Same. All right, guys. Peace out. See you next time.